hello. Thank you all for hanging in here with us. I know last panel today, sometimes a little bit hard. You've been at the expo all day, so we have some incredible people up here to tell you all about some of the medical innovations that are happening in this sector right now, and I'm so thrilled and honored to be able to moderate this panel. I am actually going to let them introduce themselves. I realize that we have sort of a limited time here, and we have 5 people that all know a lot about this topic. So we're going to just go down the line, and each panelist is going to take just about 2 minutes to introduce themselves, sort of what they do, and they're tied to this topic. And we'll start right here with Jake. Uh-oh. Here, do you want this one? I should just tell you.
Testing. All right, there we go. So I'm Jake Black, and I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Treehouse Biotech, and so we're out of Longmont, Colorado. We've been hemp processing since 2015. We do wholesale products, THC-free distillates, high-potency cannabinoid powders, and so a lot of different product offerings on the wholesale side, but what we're really interested in is the research and development of isolating different cannabinoids, cannabinoid conversion, and really being able to offer a wide variety of either purified cannabinoids or custom cannabinoid formulations. So that's roughly what we do at Treehouse.
See if this is working. This is working, so I'll pass that down. So, well, not anymore. The spot looks good. I'm just going to use this. Sorry, thanks. So, hi, my name is Rod Kite, and I'm an attorney with Kite Law Office, and we have attorneys across the country. We represent businesses in the cannabis industry, primarily with hemp and CBD. And we help with compliance, opinion letters, also general business counsel for contracts and whatnot. I have a particular interest in, I'm just going to talk loud. I'm a lawyer, so I can talk loud. I talk a lot. I have a particular interest in novel cannabinoids, and I think this panel is probably going to touch on some of that, so I look forward to our conversation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Janelle Kim. You. I am a doctor of traditional Oriental medicine, and I come from a long lineage of herbologists and doctors over the centuries who dedicated their lives to understanding herbal medicine, including cannabis, hemp, equals CBD, basically understanding the human mind and body so that we can take the very best care of ourselves. So what that means is, for many years, I have been formulating with specifically in herbal medicine, following suit in my lineage. And we started our lab, JBK Wellness Lab, started manufacturing products in the spa industries, in our high-end retail markets, Nordstrom's, Neiman Marcus, into Whole Foods, so on and so forth. And in 2012, some of the pioneers of the industry came to us based on our knowledge of herbal medicine and formulation. And at the beginning, to be honest, hesitantly, I jumped in. But when I saw the intention behind what some of these people were doing, I was happy to include CBD into part of my mission to spread the word of herbal medicine and how it can truly improve our condition. And so now we have labs here in the United States, overseas in Europe, and ultimately we contract manufacture products from skincare to dietary supplements, topicals, so on and so forth.
Excellent. My name is Peter Calfee. I'm the founder of GoFire, which is a digital health suite. We started out developing a metered dose inhaler that controls your dose in 2.5 milligram increments. We're looking at true pharmaceutical standards of consistency and control. Outside of the delivery mechanism itself, we've also developed a smartphone application available on the iOS store that acts as a Yelp for the alternative health space. So you can go on and search for pain, anxiety, PTSD, sleep, and find the products that are best rated by the community for those specific use cases and outcomes. The goal being, again, how do we start connecting patients with the right products that are going to give them the relief that they deserve. We're based out of Denver, Colorado.
Hi, I'm Dr. Karimat Alif, and my background is medicinal chemistry and clinical pharmacology, and I trained in anesthesia at Stanford, and also did MD PhD research while I was there, which led me into the world of botanicals, because the area that I was researching tumor promoting agents, they're all natural products. And that was a very long time ago, 30 plus years ago, And that was before the big divide between pharmaceuticals and natural products, but especially the attitudes about within the medical community that, you know, natural things don't work, or wherever they get those ideas from. So me being involved in cannabis really has to do with just a super fascination with what natural products bring to us already created, like in the form of cannabis, and how specific they can be to the needs that we have in managing these human bodies that we have.
So as you can see, we kind of have it all here. We have an attorney, we have a couple of doctors, a couple other people that work in data and research, so we're going to just dive right in. The first question we're going to start with, and we're going to kind of just go down the line each time, give each panelist a chance to talk here, is in what ways do you see cannabis or its constituents advancing healthcare at this point in history with where we're at in this sector right now?
I can talk about it. There. From our kind of specific lens on that, we're from a basic kind of science standpoint of understanding how these natural products work in the kind of pharmacological sense. A lot of the research just hasn't been conducted because of regulations in the past, 50 years. So science from, say, the 1970s has advanced quite a bit, and all of that kind of protocol and understanding and new methods to understand disease states and how molecules work and bind to proteins and are effective as medicines really hasn't been done on a lot of the cannabinoids, maybe on THC and CBD, but there's 100 other naturally occurring cannabinoids, and any one of them could be, the wonder drug for this or that, and there's just really no knowledge at all at this point. And so that specific thing of looking at the individual ones to understand what, CBG does, or what, Delta 8 CBD does, things like that, and then also the mixtures of those compounds in a kind of extract. When there is 100 different compounds in a mixture, how is that different than an isolated compound? So we're really excited about that from a basic science standpoint.
Thanks. I couldn't agree more. I think that it's absolutely clear that cannabinoid research for medical and health issues is inevitable. I mean, it's happening now. The genie's out of the bottle. I think we're going to see continuation of the divide between the pharma, the big pharma, and the natural products. And I don't know that the two will ever entwined, but I think we're going to see from a legal standpoint, what that division ultimately means and how each sector is regulated. I think that's going to be huge. And so with respect to, say, CBD, I think we're going to see the FDA ultimately coming down with some sort of regulations. Senator Wyden just yesterday asked the FDA to come down with a promulgate an interim rule and provide some sort of guidance. The FDA says it's going to take 3 to 5 years to come up with a full final rule. 3 to 5 years in this industry is a lifetime. And so I think we are going to see some guidance ultimately from the FDA. But another sort of lesser known piece that I think we're going to see is on the natural side. There's a lawsuit right now where a company called UCAN has sued a company called Pure Hemp over its CBD products. And UCAN claims a patent in a certain formulation of CBD, and it also holds a lot of other patents that are not subject to the lawsuit. And so the way that lawsuit plays out is going to be very important in how and the degree to which the natural products and CBD industry is going to roll out, notwithstanding how the FDA eventually promulgates its regulations.
So, I can come at it from a different point of view, and this is what I often speak on. So while I totally there can be quite a division in the way that we look at all of this, I love to start then at the fact that where there's always that division, there's always a fundamental aspect that we all, no matter whether we like it or agree or not, we can all see on some level. So I believe that before we can even get to the branches, all the cannabinoids, the terpenes, the flavonoids, but principally, before you can get to the branches, you have to know your root. And so oftentimes what I will speak on, what I love to speak on, what I love to remind us all is that although there's so much research and development that is being had and will continue to grow, which I love that aspect, we have to also remember that this is an ingredient, an herb, the CBD to cannabis to hemp, that has existed for thousands of years. And interestingly, we must remember that the same properties that we're discovering right now were known by doctors and herbologists 4,000 years ago. In 2737, Emperor Shennong, who's the divine farmer, right? So he's literally the father of all herbal medicine. And to some extent, all medicines can be rooted in botanicals, right? He's the one who first, they say, discovered and understood the use of hemp. It was one of the 50 fundamental herbs, and it was categorized as a superior herb. So what does that mean? In short, it is such a powerful herb that has so many different properties that can balance the human mind and body, and what also makes it superior is that it does not have too many side effects. And so that's a very beautiful thing when it's used as a whole herb. That's how they studied it. So that's the part that I like to at least acknowledge before we dive into all the detail, which I think is just as important. It's my favorite thing to sit up here on a panel with fellow, the Western medical doctors, the Eastern. At the end of the day, I believe, particularly with the ones that I have met on this panel, sitting on this panel in this venue, CBD Expo, the beautiful thing is that they truly do stick by, we all stand up here and stick by the very concept of the most important thing is to take care of that human mind and body connection. So
again, great fact, and again, I don't think it's as well known as it should be. When we start to look at mainstream adoption of this plant, right? Hemp, cannabis across the board. I go back to, personally, I broke my back about 4.5 years ago, and I was on a trash bag full of opiates through that process, and it actually almost stopped me from building this business. So I guess what I'm getting at is I believe there's a large amount of unsatisfied sufferers that are out there that are looking for an alternative or complementary solution to their current dosing regimen with mainstream medicine and mainstream pharmaceuticals. And so for me, I'm really focused on, I believe where we need to focus on as an industry is how do we remove the fear for those new consumers and those physicians who are stepping into the space saying, this does have application, and I believe that comes down to controlling the variables and creating that consistency and repeatability so that we can quantify our consumption, again, whether that be as a patient or as a physician. And I think, again, as we move down that process, that's what's going to, in a sense, enable the prescription pad, enable the adoption of this plant by mainstream medicine, and provide, again, a solution that, as stated by the prior panelists, is far less addictive, has far less side effects, and from my experience, far more applications. So I'm excited to be a part of this wave as this industry moves forward. And I think it's important, again, for us to look to see how we can close that gap, that split between mainstream medicine and the alternative health space. I think it's very important to, again, enable that adoption and provide that solution to, again, those unsatisfied sufferers who are looking for that alternative.
Thank you. Cannabis, to me, cannabis is going to change everything. Hemp, cannabis, as I mentioned earlier in my keynote address, CBD helps people with stress, anxiety, depression. So if you can just imagine the difference in your world with stress, anxiety, and depression, even if it's just dialed down 20%, that's a huge difference. Thanksgiving dinner will never be the same with your in-laws. Cannabis is like, I don't even have an analogy for it. It presents so many challenges on so many levels. In this culture, there's an issue with psychotropism, and I talked about that earlier too, and how sunshine is also psychotropic, which is why it reverses seasonal affective disorder. But we have to get over this issue of, do people have the right to modify their own mood? Someone whose dog just got hit by a car, is it okay for them to be happy, or should they be in mourning for 2 weeks? And if they're happy, are we going to hate them for it and think that they're uncaring? I mean, there's a whole space there of an individual coming to terms with who they choose to be. I mentioned that I train in anesthesia, and sometimes I joke and I say that it's psychotropic medicine. When you do anesthesia and also intensive care, one of the things that at least that I got out of it from observing people, inside of every one of us there's at least 12 or 13 personalities, and you just don't happen to know the other ones. And the people that know you don't know the other ones. You might know a couple of them and that they don't know. And because I would meet those people, and they were one person when they were going to sleep, and they were another person when they were waking up, and they were another person when their family came to visit them before they went home. And people will say, oh, that was drugs. Drugs don't actually do anything. Drugs absolutely have zero effect. Cocaine, heroin, MDMA, Molly, whatever, they don't actually do anything. All they function as is that they change the recipe in your brain. But all the spices in that emotional soup are already there. They don't actually add anything to it. Okay? So now you bring cannabis in, it changes the neurochemical picture, and it changes it in ways that pharmacology is not ready to deal with, medicine's not ready to deal with, because they're nonlinear. It's diversity. Botanicals are diverse. There's 500 molecules instead of one. But everybody thinks THC is the story. But if you knew the story of CBD, CBD has this effect that's called allosteric modulation. And what that means is it can go in and change how another molecule affects the cell. So you think, oh, THC hits the brain, gets you high. Well, CBD goes in there and says, oh, how about just a smile? And you can't really tell how much difference it's going to make. And perhaps this one I have an analogy for. You probably have this concept, understand whole lock and key concept, the molecule hits a receptor and something happens inside of the cell, sort of a thing, and that's what these molecules are doing. But we're used to this linear concept that the molecule goes in and it turns the light on, and when the molecule goes away, the light goes back off again. That's not what cannabis does. It dims it down. It might change the light to pink. It does these different things. And the analogy, though, is if you think of a hug, right? Maybe you're the person giving the hug, receiving the hug. So like a parent hugging their kids, or hugging their spouse, or hugging a sibling, or hugging someone they work with, or hugging a neighbor's kid that fell down. Those are all hugs. So those are all binding events. But it doesn't feel the same. It's completely different chemistry in the brain. So just because that receptor site is bound by the kid next door, by my grandson, by my wife's sister, by my wife's mom, it is not triggering the same effect. And for us to accept that a molecule has that much personality, it's just, you just got to go to India and meditate just to get into that frame of mind, to be able to accept that and then do the science. Because if the scientists can't conceive it, they can't research it. So these are big, huge, I don't know what you want to call them, that are there waiting for people that would even contemplate what it means. What is it going to mean, as you were mentioning, that there is broad consumption of cannabinoids. If you look at history, there are times in history when humans have been deficient in certain nutritional substances. For instance, the Irish potato famine, and people are running around, from what I read and heard in a documentary, 800 calories a day. Okay, Americans are like 2,500 calories a day, right? 800 calories a day, low blood sugar, sluggish brain. People aren't able to think straight. Even if they're a coal miner or something like that, they're not able to work at their full function, to the point where, supposedly, anecdotally, if you gave candy to those people, because that was right around when candy first came out, for them it was like cocaine. So the deficiency of sugar in the brain is defining their whole culture. Okay? You come forward and then people don't have vitamins in the food. You have kids that are anemic. You have all these times when humans have been relatively deficient in certain fundamental nutrients that serve some fundamental function in the body. And we've been denied primarily, speaking globally as we, cannabis for a very long time. So It's like, I don't know, 80 years without Christmas. You have no idea how the world's going to change.
And that's an interesting way of putting it, but absolutely true. And that was a great transition to what we're going to talk about next.
Would it be okay if I just pile on
Yes,
one
go ahead,
piece?
go
Because
ahead.
I think you brought up something very, very important. In mainstream medicine, we study one molecule. And when you are going to your doctor and they're prescribing you a drug, right? Anything from ibuprofen to OxyContin, they're prescribing, again, a specific chemical compound at a specific dose. And the reason, again, that we use that format in a sense is that we've currently, or historically, have lacked the means of studying more than one variable at a time. And cannabis is very different than that, right? Not to drop the entourage effect bomb, but so again, in medicine as a whole, what we're tackling here is not just a new drug coming to market or a new product, but really a new philosophy at looking at how we work with medicine and what is medicine. And again, I think that this is going back to the first thing touched on. This is the merge of Eastern and Western medicine in a concept of, again, a multifaceted, a formulation, right, that's made up of tens of, if not hundreds of different chemical compounds, achieving a specific outcome. And this is a huge step for humanity and how we approach our health. Obviously, again, we've seen the applications today, whether that be just through, again, talking to our friends and family that have experienced these, or through some of this initial research that is happening. But it starts to ask the question of applying this outside of you. What is the application? What is the applications of again, this multifaceted approach where we have more variables? And we're looking at more chemical compounds in conjunction with each other. Mike went out. Oh, she's back. Multiple chemical compounds and the effect of these compounds in conjunction with each other as a medicinal therapy, right? And I think that's just something to touch on as a huge evolutional breakthrough for our society.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that all right now because, like I was saying, that was a good transition to it because, we're going to go into cannabinoids now, and I think, people have known about THC for a long time. Now that we have the extensions on the Farm Bill, I think a lot more people know about what CBD is. So we're going to start again with Jake and go down the line and just talk about, a little bit about the different cannabinoids and what current findings and research are bringing to light for people that are consumers and also people who work in medicine. Working mic.
Great. Okay, so yeah, dive into that, and we just talked about kind of actually a brief intro to the key mechanism of how individual molecules work, and it was brought up how multiple molecules, hundreds of different molecules will affect that overall binding capacity of molecules and what the effects are. So that's a super important thing. But then when you start looking at it, ones, say CBG and CBC, those are known to bind primarily to the CB2 receptor, which is in your peripheral nervous system. Well, it's mostly in your inflammation and kind of blood cells, so throughout your body, where CB1 is localized in your central nervous system, primarily in your brain, and that's the one that is associated with the high from THC. And so all we really know, I would say, from like a definitive standpoint on what CBG and CBC do is that they bind more to the CB2 receptors, but they also have some activity with the CB1. And so this is getting back to the complexity of you have lots of different receptors, you have direct binding, you have allosteric binding. If you have multiple compounds, now you have an infinitely complex equation pretty much. So it's just at the cusp, and really CBN's been studied a bit as well, maybe CBL, just listing off three-letter acronyms, but there's 100 other cannabinoids that occur as oxidation products or naturally occurring, and really not much is known about those, to be quite honest. So it's very exciting to, again, from a, I guess, Western medicine standpoint, try to look at what they do individually, and it's definitely not the whole mixture. Completely agree with that. But if you're going to play the one variable time game, that is the scientific method, that's how you have to approach at least figuring out what one individual molecule will do.
So as a lawyer, I'm not going to talk about the science stuff. I will say that I think we're the beginning of the very beginning. CBD came out and showed everyone that there's something different than THC, which is what everyone has, at least for the last 100 years or so, associated cannabis with, and the psychotropic effect. I think there are legal and ethical issues involved with the right to modify your internal state that we're going to see played out. But with respect to studying the different cannabinoids, I know my wife who's in the audience is very excited about THCV, which is an appetite suppressant. My mother's excited about CBN, which is a sleep aid, and we've got CBC and CBG, which have potentially a lot of different types of effects and some remediation of disease. But with from the legal standpoint, I think the biggest issues we're going to be facing is the ability to research these things. From what forms of cannabis can these different compounds come from? As right now, we're seeing an explosion in hemp because hemp is no longer a controlled substance, and where marijuana is, they're both cannabis. And because we've been prohibited from studying a lot of these cannabinoids because of the legal status of marijuana. And so with the emergence of hemp, is that going to be something that is that continues? Are we going to have more restrictions based on a state-by-state level? Is the federal government going to authorize more and widely accepted tests? How is the international research going to play out? Israel has taken a very proactive role now for well over for several decades. Is the United States going to catch up to that? Is another country going to emerge? Canadian laws seem to be moving in this way with Health Canada and allowing on a national level access to medical cannabis. So all of these issues from a legal standpoint are to me at least as fascinating as the underlying scientific pieces that they regulate.
Absolutely. So kind of growing upon what we were just speaking of, there are many different cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids. We may or may not get to all of those. One thing I like to express as I'm sitting here listening to everything that's being talked about here, as we just said, there's many other cannabinoids other than CBD, right? CBD is kind of the superstar at the moment, and rightfully so, as it has a whole plethora of different properties that it can bring to our condition, mind, body. Again, as it was said, CBN is coming, will come out stronger to understand it more as more of like a sedative, right? Very strong in helping the body to kind of have that sedation effect. Then we have CBG, that's more with our mood, anxiety, depression. Obviously, these are strong claims, but studies are currently being done to look at that. Also, CBG, you think of it with bone tissue growth. What in the world? It sounds very interesting. Here we have a certain ingredient, a compound, a constituent that can help with your anxiety and mood, but also with bone tissue growth, right? That seems somewhat interesting. But now in herbal medicine, going back to that, because it blows my mind still, even though I think of this every minute of the day, that's not so unusual. And so we're sitting here, the one thing I haven't heard yet that I think is important to speak about is the endocannabinoid system. So we keep talking about all the receptors, which is so very important, but those receptors connect to a whole system. And that system is called endocannabinoid system. And the endocannabinoid system I'm very, very grateful for, because how many years I have spoken to this part of the world, the society, and spoken about meridian systems, or chi, right? Years and years ago, about 15, 17 years ago, people would say, wow, Janelle, you must have some really amazing potions. Fine, they can be called potions. I don't really care what you think they're called or what we call them together, but as long as you take them and you feel the difference for yourself. So I'm so grateful that we now speak of this endocannabinoid system, where these cannabinoids basically affect these receptors, as we spoke about before. You can look at it and understand it as the lock and key, and how it affects your brain, how it affects your entire body. And ultimately, at the very fundamental aspect of those receptors is your endocannabinoid system, which the main thing that it does is create balance, homeostasis. similar to what we spoke about for many, many thousands of years as I've been trying to get across, and very well, actually. I think that one of the things I love the most when I stand here and I'm able to see your faces or speak to a patient one-on-one, one of the most important things is hope and understanding what's going on in your mind and body. And when we start to understand these systems, I even see heads shaking right now, that is truly my favorite thing, is that my mentor always taught me, on a fundamental level, I'm human, you're human. No matter what your beliefs, no matter what my beliefs, at the end of the day, we're both human. And there's certain principles that don't change, no matter who you are, where you come from, right? And that's one of them. If we have homeostasis and balance in the body, ultimately that means everything's functioning and flowing properly. And if everything functions and flows properly, that means you have health, you have beauty, you have wellness, you have longevity. And that is one of the reasons I strongly believe that this is one of our superstar herbal ingredients, because it has the power to do that. It has the power to give balance and homeostasis to your body, mind, body. So.
That is very on point. So again, I sort of gave my piece on this earlier, so I won't belabor the point. But I do think that, again, obviously there's a lot of research that needs to happen. You know, we've seen it in trial and error, and now we need to see it proven on the clinical side. Again, I go back to that's how we remove the fear and spread the word about these specific chemical compounds and constituents that are having these effects. So that's what we're working on, I'd say.
A couple of things that I might be able to add. One is there's a small number of studies that have shown, indicated, I guess, not proved, but indicated that the endocannabinoid system mediates the placebo effect, the non-analgesic placebo effect, meaning when you give a person a placebo, like in a clinical trial or whenever, there are certain times if you're doing a pain trial and you have morphine here and a sugar pill there and the sugar pill still works, you can block that effect with something that blocks morphine, so that's known as being in the pain space. But the whole rest of the effect, where you can give someone a sugar pill and it works like a chemotherapeutic or a high blood pressure drug, that apparently is being run by the endocannabinoid system. Most drugs don't work that much better than placebos, okay? So for me, the ramifications of that are beyond astronomical, beyond some Carl Sagan, Neil Tyson phrase or something that I could come up with, because a good 60% of everything that everybody's getting out of their medication could be coming from the endocannabinoid system and the ability to modulate that. Wow, that's a really huge thing. What that tells me, as a physician, kind of geeky version of a physician as opposed to a businessman, is that we should look at the endocannabinoid system first and see where that's at before anything else. It's kind of like when somebody comes into the ER or a kid comes in the house crying or whatever. It's like there are these certain things you look at first. Is the diaper wet? Is the baby hungry? Before you decide, oh, it's this other thing. And people are still calling people diabetics and calling them cancer patients and all these things. It's like, well, this is a fundamental system. Like when somebody comes into the emergency room, are they breathing? Do they have a pulse? And if they don't have a pulse or they're not breathing, the blood sugar is not really key. It's not the important thing. And so, as the technology evolves and we have an ability to take the pulse, if you will, of the endocannabinoid system, there are things that we will understand about where that person is and why they're cranky or why they're depressed or why they're having trouble sleeping without calling it a separate disease state, because it's really about this endocannabinoid system. It's a rare opportunity to live at a time when something previously unrecognized is suddenly discovered. If you look at history, there were times when humans, at least the history that we have of humans, didn't know how blood moved in the body. And so they just thought it sloshed around, and when you walked, it just moved. And even though nobody heard it, because you stab somebody with a sword, blood comes out, whether you stab them here or here. So they just thought it was a big, like a, water balloon filled with blood. And when they found this circulatory system, and some of it's red and some of it's blue, and there's this thing that pumps it around, wow, imagine being a doctor that doesn't know that blood moves through veins and arteries. You wouldn't even be able to imagine calling that person a doctor. So you go 20 years into the future, and they say, well, doctors back in 2019 didn't know that the endocannabinoid system controlled everything. And that with a simple gummy, you can change a person from a diabetic cancer patient to a happy person that doesn't even want to go to work. Okay? And so, CBD and cannabinoids, specifically CBD, modulates the receptors that modulate behavior. So there are these neurochemicals like dopamine, the Facebook chemical. CBD modulates the effect of dopamine, the big addiction neurochemical and the happiness, learning and all that. It determines what's going on with your signal. The cannabinoids are modulating the human experience of reality. If you look at PTSD and you see that a person who has always been, afraid of snakes, cannot walk through that part of New York because they were there on 9/11. They jump whenever they hear this sound that reminds them of Kandahar or being on call at a county hospital. They have this reaction. And you can turn that off. That's a phenomenal thing. I think if I was to go out on a limb, I would say about 99.9% of human beings that I've ever been even on the same bus with have some form of PTSD. We've all been yelled at by our mom. We all got hit with a dodgeball and felt depressed. We've had these experiences in life. And to know that there's something that can go in there and change how we relate to that, so that, like a boxer, I no longer dislike getting hit in the face. I like getting hit in the face. Wow. That's a huge shift for a human being to make. And that's being run by the endocannabinoid system. So we can alter our perception and our experience of reality, and this system is there for that. For one, I don't refer to it as homeostasis. I don't even believe in it. Maybe I'm too much of an anarchist, and I grew up without a family and all those sorts of things. But yeah, exactly. Thrown by the wrong people. The human body is designed to live. It's designed for us to be able to do whatever we want to do. Okay, and that can be in the Arctic Circle, it can be in the Sahara, it can be in the Caribbean, it can be on a volcanic island. And the body can adapt to that, okay? Humans can live basically any place on this planet. How do you manage the physiology of a human being so that cold is no longer cold and the Sahara is no longer hot and fish no longer smells fishy, okay? You need to be able to do that. If you have an operating system and you're running a smart device, I call the human body a smart device, you don't want it to work well in New York where everybody's eating Coney Island hot dogs and not work in Japan because it smells like sushi. It has to be able to work in all of those environments or else your operating system sucks. So this to me is what this thing is going to show to us, that homeostasis is a choice. And if you want to be a crabby, cranky, miserable person, the endocannabinoid system can hold you right in that space, and it's not going to fix it for you. There is no great endocannabinoid God up in the sky that wants you to be happy. It just wants you to be able to survive whatever you're choosing to be.
Thank you. Good points, all of those. And I meant to say this at the beginning of the panel, but because of the size of this panel, we won't be doing an open Q&A, but all the panelists will be available afterwards if you would like to talk to them, because I do want to get to one more topic. I know we're running a little long on time, but like I said, we have so much knowledge up here, and they're just pouring it all out. So as Adam mentioned in my introduction, I'm the editorial lead for the Weed blog, and a lot of research that I've been doing for the blog and for other journalism that I do has been about kind of debunking this indica versus sativa myth and the role that terpenes play for cannabis consumers. So I really want to talk about terpenes now with these people, because there's a lot that's happening with innovations in terpenes as well, you know, all the way, you know, to brain permeability, from, you know, anti-inflammatory, things like that. So I would love to hear what you all have to say about terpenes right now.
We'll try this one. There we go. Yeah, so I'll try to keep it relatively yeah. I might need that. This mic's the worst.
You guys in the last panel of the day, so feel welcome to finish up your questions that you have.
All right. Well, cool. I'll try not to talk too much. I think terpenes are really fascinating. Almost not from the indica or sativa or any of those things, but the fact that they occur in so many other plants and so many other herbal supplements or medicines, depending on how you want to talk about it, but like the lavender extract or eucalyptus extract, or they're all the same exact molecules individually if you isolate limonene or beta-caryophyllene or whatever, any of those terpenes, they're the exact same molecule occurring all across of this like herbal biodiversity. And in most of those extracts, there's more than just one. It's not just limonene. Like, yeah, you can get it by itself chemically, but a lemon extract would have 60, 80 different terpenes, isomers. It gets really chemically complicated, but again, it's this mixture that has an effect medicinally and has, for 4,000 years it's been known. And so I think that there's probably a lot of effects, but again, it's almost back to this question of, you could look at what CBD plus beta-caryophyllene do together, and you could do a study on that, and that would be a whole scientific study, and it would take 5 years, 10 years to complete, go if you want to do clinical trials and all that, but that's impossible to do with every combination of every terpene and cannabinoid, and so it really does have to be treated more as these mixtures that are kind of, herbal supplements, but do have true medicinal effects, and whether society deems it medicine or not is beside the point. And then little history fact as well, the word pharmaceuticals and pharmacopoeia is derived from the Greek word pharmaka, which meant witchcraft. So interesting caveat there. So way back.
That's great. So I think it's important to think about terpenes from a legal standpoint in the same way that we think about CBD. CBD's legal status, despite the fact that it's the same molecule, whether it comes from a marijuana plant or a hemp plant, even though it's the same molecule, it's illegal or not, at least at the federal level, depending on the plant from which it comes. And the same happens with terpenes. Limonene or myrcene or whatever is legal if it comes from a hemp plant or some other plant that is itself lawful, but it's illegal if it comes from marijuana. And I think that's one more thing that's going to come down and need to be fixed, frankly, for studying in the future.
So speaking of terpenes, which is certainly a huge conversation, but when we look at it this way, another way that I really love to understand some of the other constituents of hemp plant, right? So we have terpenes. I like to speak on it this way, as an herbologist, right? So we study, some herbologists will study one herb for their entire life, and they will never totally understand that herb. That's true herbal medicine, right? Ultimately, we go to school and we study very hard to know herbal ingredients. A true herbal formulator understands that one herbal ingredient is very, very important, but then how you make that herbal formula. Anyone can stick a whole bunch of herbs into a product and call it an herbal product, but that's not herbal formulation. True herbal medicine is when you know how to use precise dosages of certain, and maybe that's confusing here, when you use certain herbs to balance each other, right? There's a whole study of this. Okay, certain herbs you put together to increase an effect. Certain herbs you put together to counteract one another. Sometimes you put an herb in with a whole group of herbs to neutralize that formula. Okay, that's kind of what I will call like the macrocosm of this understanding of entourage effect, right? Now we can bring that down to an individual plant, which is often what we're speaking of, or what we are speaking of right now, cannabinoids, terpenes. When you start to break down, just like an herbal ingredient in an herbal formula, the same thing happens in this hemp or cannabis plant. We have the cannabinoids that we just spoke of. We have our terpenes that do so many different effects in the body. Limonene for stress, linalool for more of a sedative, more of a mood type of modulator, right? We have beta-carotene. We have all of these that can have a lot of them have the anti-inflammatory properties. Okay, and so at the end of the day, all of these things work together. They can also be spread apart to understand and work powerfully and together. Okay, so that's how I would explain that. And interestingly, at the end of the day, what does all of this mean? What good is any of this? And I love actually that you mentioned this earlier when you spoke before, when you said homeostasis. That was such an eye-opening moment for myself, because something that I often think about and speak on is what exactly is homeostasis. If you think of it as homeostasis is this goal that you reach, that we all think that in this life we're really going to reach a state of balance, I couldn't agree more. There's no such thing. And even the most, from the Eastern philosophical point of view, which I'm certainly not going to break into right now, you have a flight to catch, and Eastern medicine, but really the fundamental of medicines, period. To me, when I say homeostasis, for me, when I say balance, that is the most dynamic. The one thing we know, Eastern, Western, doesn't matter who you are, balance means you're constantly relating, and I love how you said that. When you go up to the Sahara Desert, or you go to, the top of the mountains in the Himalayas, your body is able to be there and can survive. Why? Because of that balance, not because you've reached a state of balance and now wherever you go, you can just carry that state with you. But when you go to those places, your body's able to balance with it. So now if you have terpenes, if you have cannabinoids, if you have other botanicals that can help you to balance with your situation, mentally, physically, that is ultimately what each one of these constituents we're talking about, that's what they do. Okay, and so of course, I can go on and on, but that's the main way that I look at each of these. So know the importance of each one individually, which we're all doing a very good job understanding further as we move in, to forever, but also understanding how they relate to each other and then how that affects our body in the dynamic state of balance or homeostasis that never ever stops.
Excellent. I'm going to try and take a different angle on this, just for kicks and giggles. I think, again, throughout this panel, and I unfortunately just flew in, so I didn't see some of the other panels, but I'm assuming there's a lot of questions about how we interact with this plant, and again, the lack of research, and how do we get into that research. And again, for me, I think we're in a very interesting time, and I want to bring some solutions to the table. And so, in this day and age, over the past, call it 30 years, this concept of connectivity has really changed the world we live in, right? And we'll say it started with the internet, we'll say it started with the internet, did start with the internet. But let's look at the internet, this concept of connecting everyone in a format that allows us to share our experiences, to share our knowledge, to communicate. This has allowed us to already see, again, in other industries and other areas, incredible insights that we've learned, again, through these systems of connectivity. And in this day and age, again, we all have one of these, a smartphone. And this is a little computer in the palm of our hands. We're connected to it. It might as well be embedded in our arm. And it connects us at an even greater level to start to learn from each other in the communities that we have around us. And again, I'm a big data geek, so just a disclaimer there. So again, with that concept in mind, I think that again, and what's been driving my team and what we're working on is this concept of connectivity and community insight. And how do we, again, turn on a nightlight in that dark room in the sense of it is a very complex system to research these formulations. Again, these complex formulations of hundreds of different chemical compounds. What if we can start to share our experiences on a big data platform that allows us to start understanding what we need to research, right? And what are the important constituents, the important chemical compounds that in conjunction are working really well for pain or really well for anxiety. And so again, I know sometimes it seems like it's a huge mountain to climb, and don't get me wrong, I believe it is a Everest to climb. But I do believe that there's hope. And I believe that there's hope not just because we have brilliant minds and brilliant clinicians and physicians that are driving this, but because each and every one of you can be a part of it. Through this concept of community sharing, community feedback, driving insights into formulations and dosages and whatnot, and the applications of those formulations and dosages for specific outcomes and use cases.